The room felt heavy, as though the air itself had become a solid weight pressing down on my chest. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses surrounded me, but I couldn't focus on any of it. I was staring at her, my sister, standing at the front of the room, microphone in hand, a sly smile playing on her lips. She had already said too much, but this was the final straw. I could feel my heart rate pick up, not from embarrassment, but from the realization that something was about to change. Something irreversible. Her eyes met mine for a split second, and I could see the satisfaction gleaming in them. It was clear now, she wasn't just being playful. She wasn't joking around. This was intentional. "You know," she said, voice carrying effortlessly through the microphone, "we all know that the Malloy family is famous for their questionable business practices. But it's great that Vincent here has managed to get himself out of the game. Well, for now." The laughter followed like a wave crashing down. My brother, my friends, all of them laughed along, not knowing the truth behind her words. But I did. The mockery stung, but worse, it sounded true. It felt like a public execution, a slow, drawn-out demise at the hands of someone I should have been able to trust. I kept my face blank, cold, unmoving. I didn't flinch, even as her voice continued, digging deeper, ripping open the scars I'd worked so hard to bury. "Here's to Vincent, though," she added with a mock toast. "May he stay out of trouble this time. We wouldn't want any more family scandals, now would we?" More laughter. The room seemed to spin for a moment, but I didn't look away from her. I couldn't. Her eyes were locked on mine now, and the gleam of satisfaction in them told me everything I needed to know. This was more than just a joke. This was her declaration of war. I had kept my life clean, honest, but all of that was about to be destroyed in front of an audience of people who had no idea what was happening. What was worse, I had no idea how I was going to fix it. Not yet. But I would. I would fix it, and when I did, she'd wish she had never uttered a word. I didn't let the anger rise. I didn't let the pain seep through. The room was still full of laughter, and I was still surrounded by a crowd of people, but in that moment I was alone. Alone with the one thought that kept circling in my mind, like a wolf pacing in a cage, waiting for the moment to strike. Revenge isn't always about what you do in the moment. Sometimes it's about waiting, watching, calculating. And when the time is right, you make them wish they never crossed you. I was calm. I was composed. I smiled, and for the first time in years, the pieces of a plan began to fit together in my mind, quiet and methodical, like the ticking of a clock counting down to its final moment. As the wedding continued, I found myself retreating into the shadows of the reception hall. The laughter and clinking of glasses felt distant now, like an echo that didn't belong to me. I needed to focus. I had to clear my head, but everything was so clouded by what had just happened. How could my sister, someone I had trusted, someone who knew my past better than anyone, do this to me? I took a long, slow breath and looked at the room. The walls seemed to close in around me. My brother Jack was busy with guests, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. I watched him for a moment. He had always been the golden child of the family, straight-laced, successful, and completely unaware of the mess I'd left behind. My life had been anything but clean before I met Lena. Before I made the decision to stop running. I had lived in a world of shadowed deals, of stolen moments and whispered promises. Money laundering shell companies, the kind of operations that made the rich richer and the poor forget their names. I had made my living by doing the dirty work of those who could afford to pay, never asking questions, never questioning my own morals. But that was supposed to be in the past. I had walked away. I had chosen to leave it all behind. I couldn't let my past define me forever. But my sister, she hadn't let it go. She had stayed in the game, lurking in the background, building on everything I had left behind. She'd always admired my ability to make things disappear, to cover up the truth. In a way, I had taught her everything she knew, but now, it seemed like she had learned more than I could ever have imagined. I looked down at the photograph in my hand. The one she'd left behind on her laptop. The property listing for a Spanish colonial house in Beverly Hills. An expensive flip, even for someone as accustomed to luxury as Lena. I stared at it, trying to ignore the pang of anger that shot through me. Windong Holdings LLC. The name jumped off the screen, searing into my memory. 8 years ago, that name was my connection to a world I had left behind. It was a name tied to money that wasn't exactly legal, to clients who didn't ask questions and didn't forgive mistakes. It was a name I had buried so deep that I had convinced myself it would never see daylight again. But here it was on the paperwork Lena had been handling. In her hands, as though I was still involved. As though I had never left. How was it possible? How had she found it? And why was she using it? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. She wasn't just flipping houses. She was laundering money through them. And those shell companies I had created back in the day? They were still in use, tied to her real estate deals. I had left the criminal world, but Lena had inherited my past, using it to build a new empire for herself. She thought she could bury me, make me look like the fool. She didn't realize that I was already several steps ahead of her. She didn't know what was coming. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my mind racing as I pieced together the plan. Lena thought she had outsmarted me. She thought I was just another pawn in her game, that I would sit back and let her get away with it. But she was wrong. I had learned the game from the best, and now it was my turn to play. This wasn't going to be quick. This wasn't going to be messy. This was going to be methodical. Calculated. And in the end, Lena would be the one who was exposed. Not me. The days after the wedding were a blur. Lena tried to act like nothing had happened, as if the words she'd thrown at me in front of everyone were just a minor inconvenience. But they weren't. Not to me. Not to the man I had become. She had crossed a line, and now she was going to pay for it. I kept my distance, watching her movements from the shadows. She was still the same, always so composed, always playing the role of the perfect wife. But now something was off. I could see it in her eyes. The way she avoided me when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she made excuses for working late, or meeting with clients at odd hours. I could hear the hesitation in her voice whenever we spoke, a nervousness she hadn't shown before. It was clear now she knew that I knew. She knew that I had caught on to her game. But she still thought she could outmaneuver me. I began to observe her closely, paying attention to every detail. I watched her meet with people, take phone calls in private, and quickly shut her laptop whenever I came into the room. The more I watched, the more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Lena wasn't just flipping houses. She was using my old shell companies, the ones I had created years ago when I was laundering money for people who didn't ask questions. She was running an operation, one that I had unknowingly funded, and now I was in deep. Her confidence was growing, but so was my suspicion. I began gathering evidence quietly, documenting every detail of her life that I could. Emails, receipts, property transactions, all linked back to the companies I once controlled. It was a meticulous process. I had learned a long time ago how to cover my tracks, and now I was using that knowledge to uncover hers. One night, after she had gone to bed, I powered up her laptop again. The password was still our anniversary date, a small, careless thing she hadn't bothered to change. I didn't need to look at her private messages or emails, not yet. What I needed was the financial records, the one thing that would tie everything together. I found them. The accounts, the bank transfers, the names of clients, everything linked back to Windong Holdings LLC. It was all there in black and white, and with it the undeniable truth. Lena had been laundering money through real estate deals, using the very companies I had once controlled to keep her hands clean. I felt my pulse quicken. But I didn't act. Not yet. Lena had been sloppy, yes, but she was smart. Smarter than most, in fact. She had built a network of dummy buyers and sellers, ensuring that the money moved through the system cleanly with little trace. But there were still gaps. Small things. Details that she hadn't accounted for. The kind of things that would come back to haunt her when the time was right. I went over the documents again and again, pulling out the names of the shell companies, the transactions, the properties, each one like a thread that connected Lena to a much larger criminal network. But this wasn't just about her. It was about me. It was about making sure she understood that she couldn't use my past to build her future. As I sat there, scanning the documents, I began to see the plan form in my mind. It would take time. Patience. But I would take everything she had built and expose it. I would use her own arrogance against her, watch her fall from grace the same way she had tried to tear me down. I had the evidence now. I had the means. The trap was set. But there was one thing left to figure out, the timing. The next step would come soon enough, but I wasn't about to rush it. There was no need. Lena was too confident, too sure of herself. She thought I was defeated. She thought she had won. What she didn't realize was that the real game hadn't even started yet. The first sign of my sister's mistake came quietly, as these things often do. A casual slip-up, one that could easily be dismissed if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. I always had been. It was late one evening when I heard her on the phone in the next room. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but the words caught my ear. "We can move the money through the back channels, but I need the signature on the transfer. Make sure no one finds out. We don't want the wrong people asking questions." I froze, my pulse racing. I knew that voice, knew the calculations that lay behind every word. She was making a deal. She had been dealing with people in the shadows, but this was different. This time, the mistake wasn't just in her actions. It was in her desperation. She was afraid. That fear was a crack in her armor, one I had been waiting for. I'd been patient, silent, methodical in my approach, but now I had the opening I needed. Lena had made a critical error. She'd gotten too greedy. She thought she could keep everything running smoothly without raising suspicion, but now she had crossed a line. And it wasn't just a mistake that could be swept under the rug, it was a game changer. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I moved quickly but without haste, watching her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to act. As she continued to focus on her deals, I went deeper into her records, uncovering more about the people she was dealing with, the ones I'd never known about until now. They weren't just clients. They were powerful people, the kind of people who didn't take kindly to being betrayed. The more I dug, the more I realized how far Lena had gone to cover her tracks. She had used every trick in the book to hide the money, from fake buyers to shell companies registered in other countries. But none of it mattered now. I had the key pieces, the critical evidence I needed to take her down, and she didn't even know it. One night after Lena had gone to bed, I sat at her desk and reviewed the latest batch of transactions. The numbers were almost too perfect, too smooth. But as I looked closer, I saw something that didn't quite add up. A discrepancy, a detail I had missed before but couldn't ignore now. It was small, just a shift in the timing of one of her payments, but it was enough to raise a red flag. I wasn't the only one who had been watching her. She had made a mistake, and the evidence was now undeniable. It wasn't just the money that was at risk. It was everything she had built, her reputation, her network, her carefully crafted facade. It was all about to come crumbling down. I smiled as I closed the files. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The trap was set. I knew what I had to do next. It wasn't just about exposing Lena for what she was. It was about making sure that when the authorities came knocking, she had no one to turn to, no one to blame but herself. And she would pay the price for everything she had stolen, for everything she had tried to do to destroy me. But she wouldn't know until it was too late. The morning after I discovered the final piece of the puzzle, I felt an unsettling calm settle over me. It was as if everything I had planned, all the frustration and waiting, had been leading up to this very moment. The timing had to be perfect. No room for mistakes. Lena would think she had everything under control. She would never see the end coming. I had learned a long time ago that revenge isn't about acting in anger. It's about precision, about making sure that every move is calculated, every action carefully executed. Lena had made the mistake of underestimating me. She thought she could humiliate me, manipulate me, and that I would just take it. She was wrong. I watched her that morning, moving around the house like everything was normal. She didn't suspect anything. She hadn't even noticed that the walls were closing in. As I sat at the kitchen table, watching her prepare her usual breakfast, I could almost feel the weight of the moment. This was the endgame. The moment I had been waiting for. And yet, I felt no satisfaction. No relief. There was no joy in revenge. There was only strategy. I made my move when she left for her meeting. She had no idea that I had already reached out to the right people, the ones who could make everything she'd built come crashing down. It wasn't going to be loud or messy. It was going to be surgical. The key to taking someone down isn't in making a scene, it's in waiting for them to hang themselves. And Lena had given me the rope. I had made sure the right people were watching her. The ones who would expose her dealings. The ones who would destroy her before she even realized what had happened. And as I sat there, waiting for her to return, I knew that it would all come together in the most perfect way. She came back later that afternoon, completely unaware. She walked into the house, looking so sure of herself. Her posture was confident, the way she moved was practiced. But there was a small shift in her eyes, a flicker of something uncertain. She was starting to feel the pressure. But it was too late for her to back out now. "Vincent," she said as if nothing was wrong. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I replied, my voice calm. I didn't let on that I knew everything. I didn't let her see the storm that was coming. She didn't ask questions. She was too distracted by the phone calls she had been getting, by the tightening noose around her neck. I could see it now, she was beginning to panic. She didn't know that her perfect world was about to fall apart. I waited, watching her with a sense of cold satisfaction. I knew she thought she was in control. But I had already set everything in motion. And then, it happened. The phone call. The one that changed everything. Her face went pale as she heard the voice on the other end of the line. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. I could tell by the way she gripped the phone, the way her fingers trembled. Her perfect little world was starting to crumble. And there was nothing she could do about it. I watched her break. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no shouting. Just a quiet realization that everything she had built, everything she had stolen from me, was coming back to destroy her. And in that moment I knew that the plan had worked. She wasn't just being exposed. She was being erased. The authorities were already on their way, the investigation had been set in motion, and I knew it would be just a matter of hours before they came for her. Her network would turn on her, her connections would abandon her, and her carefully constructed empire would come crashing down under the weight of her own lies. But the most satisfying part wasn't watching her face as she realized she'd lost. It wasn't even the thought of seeing her behind bars. It was knowing that I had never raised my voice. I had never acted out of anger. I had simply played the game better than she ever could. The trap had been set and she had walked right into it. The morning after everything came crashing down, I sat in the same place where it all began, the kitchen table. The scent of coffee lingered in the air, but it was no longer comforting. It felt cold now, like a reminder that everything had changed. Lena's empire was no more. The web of lies she had so carefully woven over the years had unraveled in a matter of hours. The authorities had moved in swiftly, taking control of her properties, freezing her assets and questioning her associates. They were all too eager to turn on her. The ones who had helped her cover her tracks, who had benefited from her crimes, now wanted nothing more than to distance themselves from the wreckage she had left behind. I knew the process wouldn't be quick. Justice never was. But it was inevitable. Her downfall was set in motion, and now it was just a matter of time before the full weight of her actions came crashing down on her. She had thought she could manipulate the system, use her charm to escape her past. But in the end, it was her arrogance that sealed her fate. I stayed quiet, watching from the sidelines as everything unfolded. I didn't need to get involved anymore. The work was done. The plan was executed to perfection. Lena had made one mistake after another, and now she was paying the price for them. But even as I watched her world burn, I couldn't help but wonder how it had all come to this. How had we gone from a life I once thought we could build together to this twisted game of revenge? The phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. It was Agent Wexler from the Financial Crimes Division. "Mr. Malloy," he said, his voice even and professional, but I could sense the undertone of something darker in his tone. "We've completed our investigation. Your sister's involvement in the money laundering scheme is clear. We've found enough evidence to charge her with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The assets have been seized. The network she built is in shambles." I felt a strange sense of satisfaction wash over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was something else. A cold certainty that this was how it was always supposed to end. Lena had always thought she could escape the past. She had thought she could destroy me, use me as a pawn in her game, but in the end, it was her who had been exposed. "What about the other people involved?" I asked. "We're still looking into them," Wexler replied. "But don't worry. She'll be facing federal charges. It's only a matter of time before the full scope of her actions comes to light. You've been cooperative, Mr. Malloy. You've helped us more than you know." I hung up, feeling strangely detached from it all. Lena was getting what she deserved, but there was no satisfaction in it. Revenge, I realized, was never as fulfilling as it seemed from the outside. It was necessary, yes, but it didn't fill the emptiness left behind. I glanced around the room, the place that once felt like home, and realized it had never truly been a home for me. It had been a stage, a place where I had been playing a part, pretending to be someone I wasn't. And now the game was over. Lena had destroyed herself, and I had been the one to watch it happen. The days that followed Lena's fall from grace were eerily quiet. The phone calls stopped, the meetings ended, and the hustle and bustle of the life we had once known seemed to fade into the background. For the first time in years I felt like I could breathe again. But it wasn't a relief. It was more like the calm after a storm, too still, too empty. It was hard to describe the feeling. There was no joy in seeing Lena get what she deserved. No happiness in the fact that she was facing the consequences of her actions. Instead, I felt a sense of finality, of things being left undone. I had taken my revenge, yes, but I couldn't shake the nagging thought that something more needed to be done. I spent the next few weeks dealing with the fallout. It wasn't just about Lena anymore. There were people involved in this, connections that went deeper than I had anticipated. The money laundering operation she had been running was just the tip of the iceberg. She had been connected to people I'd never imagined, powerful people who wouldn't go down without a fight. I started receiving calls from unexpected places, people asking questions trying to cover their own tracks. They thought I was still involved. They thought I was a part of it all. But they were wrong. They didn't realize that the game had changed. I wasn't the pawn anymore. One evening I sat in my office going through old files trying to tie up loose ends, when I heard a knock at the door. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The scent of expensive perfume, the way the door opened with a slow, deliberate creak. I had been expecting this. Lena. She stood in the doorway, her posture stiff, her expression cold, but there was something behind her eyes, a flicker of desperation. I could see it now. She was scared. "Vincent," she said, her voice sharp, but not without a trace of something else. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything at first. I just studied her, watching as she moved further into the room, as if she hadn't just been exposed for the criminal she was. As if she hadn't just been responsible for everything we had lost. "I didn't think you'd come back," I said finally. Her lips tightened. "I didn't have a choice." "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" I asked. My voice was calm, colder than it had ever been. "I didn't think you'd care," she replied, her voice softening. "I thought you'd just move on with your life. Let me take the fall like you always do." I stood up, the anger slowly rising inside me. "No, Lena. You crossed a line. You used me. You used my past to create your perfect little empire of lies, and now look where we are." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes never leaving mine. "I didn't have a choice," she said again, more forcefully this time. "You were always so perfect. I wanted to be more than just your shadow. I wanted to have something of my own." I shook my head. "You wanted control. And in the process you destroyed everything. Everything we built together." She paused, her gaze flickering toward the window, as if searching for an answer she already knew. "I didn't think you'd ever catch on. I thought I could do it all without anyone noticing. But I was wrong. I underestimated you." "You underestimated everything," I said, my voice colder than before. "You underestimated me, and you underestimated the people you were dealing with." I didn't need to say it out loud, but she knew. She knew I had already set the plan in motion. She knew there was no coming back from this. Her fall from grace wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everything she had done to destroy those who had once trusted her. And now she was about to face the consequences of her own mistakes. The silence between us stretched, heavy and thick, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Lena didn't speak again. She just stood there, eyes downcast, waiting for something, an apology perhaps, or a chance to explain herself. But I had nothing to say to her. She had used me, manipulated me, and now I was left with the aftermath. "You thought I wouldn't retaliate," I said, finally breaking the silence. "You thought you could walk away from all of this without facing the consequences." She looked up at me, and for a brief moment, I saw the vulnerability in her eyes. It wasn't much, just a flicker, a crack in the mask she had worn for so long, but it was enough to tell me she was afraid. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to ruin everything." I almost laughed. The audacity. After everything she had done, after everything I had discovered about her, now she was claiming to be sorry? "You didn't mean to ruin everything? Is that supposed to be some kind of apology?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. "Do you even understand the mess you've created? The lives you've ruined?" I never wanted this to happen. I just wanted more. I wanted power. I wanted control." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the desperation she had been trying to hide. "And now I'm losing everything." I could feel the satisfaction creeping in. The feeling of control that had eluded me for so long was finally mine. But as I stood there, looking at the woman who had once been my partner, the woman who had betrayed me more than I could have ever imagined, I realized something. The revenge I had been planning wasn't going to bring me the peace I sought. It wasn't going to fix the damage she had done. But it was necessary. It was what she deserved. "I'm not going to let you get away with this," I said slowly, the words coming out cold. "You will face the consequences of your actions, Lena. Whether you like it or not." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at me as if waiting for me to offer some kind of mercy. But there would be no mercy. "You've made your bed," I continued, "and now you're going to lie in it. I'm not going to let you manipulate your way out of this one." She stood silently for a long moment before finally speaking. "What are you going to do?" "You're going to get what's coming to you," I said, my voice final. "But there's a part of me that wonders. If you had just let it go, if you had just stayed out of the game, maybe things would have been different. Maybe I could have walked away and we could have had a life." Her eyes softened for a moment, but the vulnerability didn't last. She quickly regained her composure as if it had never been there. "You're not going to help me, are you?" I shook my head. "No. This time there's no saving you." For a long time we just stood there staring at each other. It was over. All of it. There was no going back. Lena had made her choices and now she would have to live with them. She turned to leave, but as her hand reached for the door handle, she paused. "You always were smarter than me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think you had it in you." I didn't respond. What was there to say? She had pushed me to this point, but it was her own doing. She had been so consumed by her desire for power and control that she had forgotten one simple truth. Those who live by deception will eventually be exposed. And she had been exposed. The following weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, legal battles, and shattered alliances. Lena was in a downward spiral, one she couldn't escape no matter how hard she tried. She had underestimated the sheer weight of the forces she had been playing with. What started as a small, calculated game of money and power quickly became a fight for survival. I watched from the sidelines, my role complete. I had given Lena just enough rope to hang herself. The authorities were circling, closing in on her every move. The arrests came swiftly, each one another nail in the coffin of the empire she had built. And with each passing day, I found myself distanced further from the woman I once loved. The one who had once smiled at me with affection, who had whispered sweet promises into my ear. Now she was a shadow of that woman. A woman who had lost everything, her freedom, her wealth, her connections, and for what? She had destroyed herself, and I had been the architect of her demise. I didn't feel guilt though. Not anymore. There had been a time when I had wondered if I would regret this moment, if I would look back and wish I had taken a different path. But now, looking at the wreckage of everything she had built, I realized that there was no other way. There was no way I could have walked away without letting her continue her reign of manipulation and deceit. One evening, I received a call from Agent Wexler. I hadn't expected it, not after everything had already fallen apart, but when his name appeared on my phone, I picked up without hesitation. "Mr. Malloy," he said, his voice flat but with an undertone of something I couldn't place. "We've got her. Lena Malloy has been arrested. The case is going to trial, and it's only a matter of time before we have everything on record." "Good," I replied, my voice betraying nothing. "I expected as much." He paused before continuing. "But there's something you need to know, Vincent. We found something unexpected." My stomach dropped. My mind raced as I tried to prepare myself for whatever news he was about to deliver. "Something you missed," Wexler added. "A financial trail that leads to other parties. People much bigger than Lena. People with a lot more power than we thought." I felt my heart skip a beat. For the first time in weeks I could sense the danger lurking. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice steady, though every nerve in my body was on high alert. "Her operation, Vincent, it wasn't just her. She had connections. Powerful ones. The kind that will do anything to cover their tracks. Anything to make sure their operation stays hidden. We're digging into it now, but it's going to be bigger than we thought. And we may need your help." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of his words settling over me like a thick fog. I had walked away from this life, but it seemed like this life wasn't done with me. "Help? What kind of help?" I asked, trying to make sense of what was happening. "We need information," Wexler said. "We need to know who Lena was working with. And we need someone who knows the inner workings of the criminal world, someone who can connect the dots for us. You've been there, Vincent. You know how these people think." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't part of the plan. I had thought I was done with all of this, but now I realized that the mess Lena had made wasn't finished yet. It was just beginning. "You want me to be your informant," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Wexler's response was quiet, almost as if he knew what I was thinking. "Yes. But it's not just about us. This is bigger than Lena. If we can bring down these people, we'll have a shot at ending this network once and for all." I sat there for a long moment, the decision weighing heavily on me. On one hand, I wanted nothing to do with this life anymore. On the other hand, I knew how this game worked. I knew how things like this played out. And I couldn't turn my back on it. "If I do this," I said slowly, "there's one condition." "Name it," Wexler replied, his tone firm. "I want full immunity. No trial, no prison time. I walk away from this and I never look back." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Wexler spoke again. "Done. But you'd better be sure about this, Vincent. Once you're in, there's no turning back." I didn't hesitate. "I'm sure." The next few days felt like a fog, thick, suffocating, and disorienting. I had made my choice, but it wasn't one that came easily. Being pulled back into a life I thought I had escaped wasn't something I took lightly. It wasn't just about Lena anymore. It was about the people who had been in the shadows all along, the ones who had played the game just as well as she had, if not better. I found myself sitting across from Agent Wexler in a sterile, fluorescent-lit room again. This time, the tension between us was palpable. He had a file in front of him, but we weren't here for casual conversation. We were here because the stakes had risen, and now my involvement in the case had taken on a new level of urgency. "You've made your decision, Vincent," Wexler said, his voice grim. "And now we're all in this together. You're going to help us track down these connections, but there's a cost. You'll be taking on a very dangerous role." I nodded. I had already made the choice, but hearing it out loud somehow made it feel more real, more final. "Tell me who I'm dealing with," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the knot that was tightening in my stomach. "Give me something to work with." Wexler slid the file across the table. I opened it without hesitation. Inside were names, dates, and connections that were all linked to Lena's operation, but also to something much larger. These were the kinds of people I had spent years avoiding. And now I was being dragged back into their world. "You'll start by focusing on these names," Wexler continued, tapping a few on the sheet. "Russian syndicates, money laundering, drug trade, arms dealing. We know they've been involved with Lena, but we need to know who else is in the chain." I felt a chill run down my spine as I read through the details. This was no longer just a game of high-end real estate or shell companies. These were serious criminals, people who didn't hesitate to do whatever it took to protect their empire. People who didn't mind spilling blood if it meant securing their interests. "These people don't leave loose ends," I said quietly. "And if they find out I'm working with you—" "They won't find out," Wexler interrupted, his tone hard. "You'll be working under the radar, behind the scenes. You'll provide us with intel, but it'll be carefully managed. We won't risk you getting exposed. But you need to understand one thing: if you make a wrong move, if they get wind of you, it won't just be you at risk. It'll be everyone involved." I didn't need to be told twice. I knew how these people worked. I knew the game I was playing, and I knew how high the stakes were. "All right," I said, closing the file and looking up at Wexler. "What's next?" "We'll keep the pressure on Lena," he said. "We'll use her for leverage, see where the trail leads. But we need you to dig deeper, find out exactly who's funding this operation, who's pulling the strings behind the scenes." I leaned back in my chair, trying to process everything. This wasn't the life I wanted, but it was the life I was living. There was no way out now. The only way forward was to finish what I had started, to dismantle Lena's empire piece by piece, even if it meant going deeper into the darkness. "How do we start?" I asked, knowing full well what the answer would be. Wexler didn't hesitate. "We start with what Lena's hiding. We start with the money. You've got the inside track. You'll help us identify the weak points. We'll handle the rest." I nodded, standing up and grabbing the file. "I'll do my part," I said, more to myself than to him. As I left the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking down a path I could never come back from. I had already sacrificed so much to get here, and now it felt like the stakes had been raised. Lena's fall had been inevitable, but the fallout from what she had done was just beginning. And I was right in the middle of it. I had no choice but to keep moving forward. The people I was about to go up against were dangerous, but they wouldn't scare me. I had already been in the game once. I knew how to play. The only question now was how far I was willing to go to finish this. The days blurred together as I immersed myself in the investigation. Each step I took brought me deeper into a web of lies and deception, one that stretched further than I had ever anticipated. Lena had been the catalyst, but now it was clear that the operation she had built was merely one piece of a much larger puzzle. A puzzle I was now piecing together with careful precision, but at the same time, it was pulling me in deeper than I could have imagined. I kept working with Agent Wexler, gathering intel, providing whatever leads I could. But the closer we got to the truth, the more dangerous things became. Every time I thought I had a lead, it would vanish. Every name we investigated seemed to lead to another dead end or a bigger player than we had expected. But something was different now. I wasn't just trying to take Lena down anymore. I was in too deep. This wasn't a game of retribution. It was a fight for survival. I received another call from Wexler one evening, his voice more urgent than usual. "We've got a situation," he said. "Something's not right. We've been following the money, but now we're seeing discrepancies. Big ones." My heart skipped a beat. What kind of discrepancies? It looks like someone's been playing both sides. Lena's been feeding us information, but I'm starting to think she's not the one pulling the strings here. Someone's been covering their tracks. Someone bigger. I sat up straighter, a chill creeping up my spine. "You think she's working with someone else?" "I don't know yet," Wexler replied. "But there are things we're missing, Vincent. Things that don't add up. The money isn't moving the way it should be. We need you to dig deeper into her connections. There's a lot more at play here than we thought. I felt the weight of his words settle in. This wasn't just about Lena anymore. The game had changed. Someone else was playing it. And I had no idea who they were. All right, I said, my voice steady. I'll get on it. I spent the next few days combing through everything I had. Every contact Lena had, every transaction, every possible lead I could follow. But no matter how hard I searched, the connections I needed kept slipping through my fingers. It felt like I was walking through a maze that kept changing its shape. Then, on the third night, I finally found something. It was a small detail hidden in the back of a ledger I'd almost missed. A wire transfer. A series of large payments made to an overseas account. The name on the account didn't ring any bells, but the bank it was tied to, Belfort Financial Group, did. I'd heard whispers about it in the past, but it had always been under the radar. It wasn't a name that came up in the open. I took the name to Wexler the next day. He didn't say much, but I could see the shift in his eyes as soon as I mentioned it. Belfort Financial, he repeated. That's a major player. I didn't think they were involved with Lena's operation. But if they are, this just got a whole lot more complicated. I nodded. Who are they connected to? What's their game? They're connected to some serious people. Not just Russian syndicates but international cartels. We're talking arms dealing, trafficking, things that make money laundering look like child's play. I felt the blood drain from my face as the gravity of the situation hit me. This wasn't just about Lena anymore. This was about an entire network and I was tangled in the middle of it. Then we need to shut them down, I said, my voice more determined than ever. Wexler didn't respond right away. Instead, he just looked at me, his face hard, his eyes calculating. You're in deep now, Vincent. I hope you realize that. These people don't forgive. If you go after them, you're not just going to take down Lena. You're going to expose yourself to a whole new world of trouble. I didn't hesitate. I'm already exposed. Wexler sighed, pushing the file aside. All right. But you have to understand this isn't going to be easy. These people, whoever they are, they'll do anything to protect themselves. And if they find out you're working with us, they'll come after you. They'll come after everyone. I nodded. I knew the risks. But at this point I had no choice. I had already crossed a line. And now there was no turning back. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, but with each new revelation the game became more dangerous. The enemies I had once left behind were closing in, and the more I uncovered, the harder it became to trust anyone, especially myself. I wasn't sure who I could trust anymore. But one thing was clear. Lena had played me, but now I was the one who was playing the game. The game had changed. The stakes had escalated. What started as a simple act of revenge had morphed into something far more dangerous than I had ever expected. The deeper I dug into Lena's dealings, the more I realized how little I actually knew. She had been a small part of a much bigger operation, one that spanned across continents and involved players with more power than I could ever have imagined. The moment I discovered the connection to Belfort Financial Group, everything I thought I knew about the world shifted. These weren't just criminals, they were organized, methodical, and ruthless. And they didn't care who got caught in the crossfire as long as they were protected. I continued working with Wexler, feeding him information, gathering whatever intel I could. But every move I made felt like a step closer to the edge. I was walking a tightrope, balancing between survival and destruction. The more I helped the authorities, the more I exposed myself to danger. The people I was going after were too powerful to be ignored. And they had no intention of letting me walk away. Then one night, everything came to a head. I was sitting alone in my office, reviewing the final pieces of evidence I had gathered when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. A number I didn't recognize, but one that sent a chill down my spine. I answered, heart racing. Vincent Malloy, the voice on the other end said. It was a woman's voice, smooth and calculated. You don't know me, but I know you. And I know exactly what you've been doing. I froze. The voice was unfamiliar, but the tone, the way she spoke, it was clear she knew more about me than I was comfortable with. You've been playing both sides, Vincent, she continued, her voice silky but sharp. But now you've crossed a line. There's no going back from this. I stood up, pacing, trying to keep my cool. Who the hell is this? You don't need to know my name, she replied. What matters is that you've made a choice. And now you'll live with the consequences. I could feel the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just some random threat. This was someone who had been watching me. Someone who knew exactly what I was involved in. Someone who had the power to ruin everything. Listen to me carefully, she continued. You've been playing a dangerous game, Vincent. And you've made enemies in places you don't even understand. If you want to survive, you'll stop digging into things that don't concern you. Let this go. Let Lena take the fall and walk away. Because if you don't, the people I work with will make sure you disappear. And so will everyone you care about. I felt the weight of her words, the finality in them. This was no longer just about Lena. This was about my life, my survival. I had come so far, but now I realized I was staring down the barrel of a much bigger threat. Who are you working with? I asked, my voice low but steady. I needed to know what I was up against. That's not important, she replied cryptically. What matters is that you're out of your depth. But don't worry, Vincent. You won't be alone. We'll be keeping an eye on you. You won't be able to make a move without us knowing. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there for a long time, the weight of her words hanging in the air. This wasn't the end I had imagined. It wasn't the justice I had wanted. But it was the reality I was now living in. I had done what I set out to do. I had taken down Lena, exposed her lies, and watched her empire crumble. But in doing so, I had stepped into a world I wasn't prepared for. And now the people behind her were watching me, waiting for my next move. For the first time in years, I felt completely out of control. The pieces of the puzzle were shifting faster than I could keep up with. And I knew that no matter how much I tried to distance myself from the world I had left behind, it would always find a way to pull me back in. But this was the game now. There was no turning back. And if I was going to survive, I had to play it by their rules. I made my decision. I would go on the offensive. I would use everything I knew, every connection I had, to find out who was behind this and put an end to it once and for all. The game had changed, yes. But I wasn't done yet. I wasn't going to disappear into the shadows. I was going to finish what I started. This wasn't just the end of Lena's story. It was the beginning of mine.